Daniel Whitman sat in the high-rise apartment he had called home for over a decade, staring at the skyline of Manhattan as the late afternoon sunlight slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below shimmered with motion and life, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing above. The honking of cabs, the distant murmur of voices, the occasional blare of a siren, all of it seemed muted, like a world that existed in another dimension, one that had nothing to do with him or the life he had meticulously built. He rested his elbows on the glass coffee table, hands clasped tightly, knuckles whitening. The leather of the sofa beneath him creaked as he shifted. Across the room, a framed photograph of him and Olivia smiled back at him. She wore that effortless, slightly mischievous grin that had made him fall in love with her 15 years ago. Her auburn hair fell just above her shoulders, the sunlight catching the subtle waves in a way that made them glow. He could almost hear her laugh, the one that used to fill the apartment on weekend mornings, but that was years ago. Now, he barely heard her, even when she was in the same room. Daniel had made up his mind. Divorce seemed inevitable. The thought had settled in his chest like a stone months ago, cold and immovable. He had tried counseling, date nights, and even those long drives into the Hamptons they used to take on rare weekends, hoping to rekindle something, anything. But each attempt had been met with polite smiles, half-hearted conversations, and the kind of silence that screamed louder than words. He imagined telling her tonight. Imagined the calm, almost procedural tone he would use. "Olivia, I think it's over. I think we need to separate." He could see the subtle flinch, the tightening of her jaw, the brief widening of her eyes before she hid it behind her practiced poise. Daniel had seen that look 100 times before with clients at his law firm, people masking panic behind composure, but never with the person whose heart he had once cradled in his own hands. He thought about what everyone else would say, the neighbors in their Upper East Side building, the colleagues who had always assumed they were the perfect couple, the friends who envied the polished, public image of their marriage. The divorce wouldn't just be a private heartbreak, it would be a spectacle, an acknowledgement that perfection was a lie. Daniel had long known that appearances were deceiving, yet even he had convinced himself that maybe, just maybe, theirs had been genuine. He rose and walked toward the kitchen, running a hand along the cold marble countertop, feeling the chill seep into his palm. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light like a fragment of fire, and took a slow sip. The warmth spread through his chest, a small comfort in the emptiness of the apartment. He thought of the nights they had shared here, the laughter, the quiet dinners, the arguments that ended with tender apologies whispered in the dark. Those memories seemed both vivid and distant, like watching old home movies through fogged glass. Daniel's phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Olivia. "I'll be home late. Don't wait up." Just 4 words, but they carried the weight of months, maybe years, of unspoken distance. He set the glass down, staring at the message, feeling the familiar ache of rejection and loneliness. He knew she wasn't cheating, not in the way tabloids dramatized it, but she had checked out, emotionally, and every tiny step away had built an invisible wall between them. He moved to the balcony, the wind biting at his face, and looked down at the streets where people hurried along, each with their own battles and triumphs. Daniel wondered if any of them truly understood the cost of keeping up appearances. He thought about his own compromises, the late nights at the firm, the missed dinners, the birthdays forgotten. He had built a life, a fortress of success, but in doing so, had he neglected the only person who had ever loved him without reservation? His mind drifted to the letter he had started drafting a week ago, words carefully chosen, void of accusation, only truth and clarity. He had imagined reading it aloud to her, sentence by sentence as if narrating the inevitable conclusion of their story. "Olivia, I've tried. I've tried to bridge the distance, to meet you halfway, but the gap has only grown. I cannot continue living in this silence.
I cannot continue pretending that the love we had is enough to sustain this marriage." He paused at that last line, feeling the weight of it settle like lead in his chest. Was it truly love that had sustained them all these years? Or was it habit, obligation, fear of being alone? He had no easy answer, only the gnawing certainty that continuing this way would slowly erode both of them. His gaze fell on a small cracked vase in the corner of the balcony, once Olivia's favorite, now forgotten. He imagined setting it down, letting it fall, watching it shatter. And he realized that was exactly what he feared, the collapse of something fragile, beautiful, and irreparable. But maybe it had already shattered, quietly, in the spaces between their words, the missed glances, the growing silences. He inhaled deeply, tasting the city air, tinged with exhaust and the faint hint of blooming flowers from a neighbor's balcony below. The decision felt final, inevitable. He would file the papers next week, make the calls, and take the steps he had rehearsed countless times in his mind. He would act with dignity, with the measured precision of a man who had built his life around control. But even as he thought this, a part of him, small, stubborn, and unwilling, hesitated. That hesitation, he knew, was the human part of him, the part that had loved, that had laughed, that had mourned the loss of connection. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. That maybe the fragile threads of understanding, empathy, and truth could still pull them back from the brink. Daniel looked once more at the skyline, the setting sun bleeding gold into the horizon, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a sliver of doubt. Divorce had seemed like the inevitable conclusion, but even as the city roared beneath him, he felt the faint pulse of possibility, the faint reminder that behind every assumption, every hurt, there might still be truths untold, secrets whispered in confidence, and the chance for something he hadn't dared to hope for. And for a moment, Daniel did not know what he would do next.
The next morning, Manhattan awakened with its usual rhythm, the rumble of subway cars, the chatter of hurried pedestrians, the faint aroma of roasted coffee drifting from corner cafes. Daniel Whitman moved through it all like a ghost, his tailored navy suit pressed to perfection, tie knotted just so, leather briefcase in hand. To anyone watching, he was the picture of a successful attorney, composed and unflappable, but inside, he felt hollow, a man navigating meticulously choreographed life, while the music of intimacy and trust had long since faded. Breakfast had always been a quiet affair for him and Olivia, a ritual punctuated by the clink of cutlery and the occasional polite remark. Today, as he poured himself a cup of black coffee, he noticed the empty side of the table across from him. Olivia had already left for the PR firm's early meeting. Her absence, once comforting, allowing him solitude, now pressed upon him with the weight of unspoken words. He sipped slowly, letting the bitter warmth fill the emptiness. The apartment, gleaming and modern, reflected their carefully curated life. Every surface polished, every book and photograph in place, every lamp and vase selected for style rather than sentiment. Yet, despite the perfection, a settled tension hum in the air, an almost tangible pause between rooms that had once vibrated with shared laughter and whispered secrets. Daniel's eyes lingered on a framed invitation to a charity gala pinned on the corkboard, a reminder of appearances they had always maintained for the world outside, even as their private lives frayed. At the elevator, he exchanged nods with neighbors who never knew the battles waged behind closed doors. A brief smile here, a polite good morning there, and he was gone, swallowed by the city's pulse. At his law firm, the rhythm of the day swallowed him. Case files, conference calls, depositions, client meetings. The very structure that had once grounded him now felt like a prison of obligations. Every polite "thank you, Daniel" from a colleague or client struck him as hollow. They didn't know him. They didn't see the man who walked out of the apartment each morning thinking about divorce papers he hadn't yet signed, about the fragile threads of a relationship he might still save or irrevocably sever. During lunch, Daniel sat alone at a corner table in a sleek midtown bistro, scrolling through social media on his phone. Images of friends' perfect marriages, weekend getaways, new cars, and happy pets bloomed together. He liked a few pictures absent-mindedly, though none of it mattered. Even seeing Olivia's latest LinkedIn post, an article she had written praising resilience in modern workplaces, stirred an odd mixture of pride and melancholy. She was brilliant, ambitious, a woman who could command a room and charm a crowd. But the very qualities that drew him to her had also created a chasm between them.
Back at the office, Daniel's assistant, a cheerful woman named Marcy, reminded him of a deposition that afternoon. He nodded, half listening, his mind wandering back to Olivia. He recalled small things, how she always stirred her coffee counterclockwise, the soft laugh she gave when she tripped over words during presentations, the way she arranged flowers in a vase as if composing a poem without words. These mundane details, once invisible, now seemed charged with the weight of absence, like fragments of a language they had both forgotten how to speak. By mid-afternoon, the monotony pressed down harder. A series of client meetings stretched on, legal jargon exchanged like currency, smiles plastered over concern. Daniel listened, nodded, advised, but internally he was elsewhere, tracing the trajectory of his marriage, wondering if he had been blind to her signals. Had he ever truly seen her? Or had ambition and routine kept him from noticing her subtle pleas for attention, for empathy, for acknowledgement? That evening, returning to the apartment, the city skyline had already shifted from gold to dusky violet. The glow of windows across the street mirrored his own. People with lives behind glass walls, each one carrying secrets, regrets, desires. Olivia's car was gone. Her coat wasn't in the hall. The apartment smelled faintly of citrus cleaner she favored, a ghost of her presence. He moved through their rooms, noting how still everything felt, how absence could be almost physical. He sat at the kitchen counter, opened his laptop, and began drafting a list. Appointments, cases, reminders, all meticulously ordered. But his mind strayed, filling the margins with thoughts of Olivia. Their last argument, trivial and yet explosive, played in loops. The way she had turned her head, avoiding eye contact, and how he had stormed out, thinking pride would shield him from the pain. Yet pride was brittle, and the wound beneath it remained raw. Later, he wandered into the living room, picked up the framed photograph of them at a charity gala 2 years prior. He traced her smiling face with a fingertip. There had been laughter that night, real laughter, not the polite echoes of social obligation. He remembered how she had leaned on his shoulder during the slow dance, whispering a joke no one else heard. And yet, somewhere along the way, that closeness had dissolved into routine, obligations, and silence. As he prepared dinner for himself, something simple, reheated pasta and a glass of wine, Daniel reflected on the rituals that had once signified care and intimacy. The cutting of vegetables together, the shared glance when a song played on the stereo, the soft late-night conversations that had once bled into confessions. They were gone, but the memory lingered, a haunting rhythm that underscored the emptiness of their present. By the time Olivia returned, the apartment was quiet, dinner eaten, dishes cleaned, the city lights casting shadows across polished surfaces. She barely noticed his presence, her phone lighting up constantly with work notifications. Daniel watched her for a moment, studying her expression. Focused, professional, yet tired. The woman he had once adored was still here, but so was the distance, the unspoken hurt, the slow erosion of shared life. He went to bed alone that night, the sheets cold on one side. The city hummed beyond the windows, indifferent to his turmoil. As he stared at the ceiling, Daniel wondered if routine had been their enemy all along, the invisible current that carried them apart without dramatic confrontation, without betrayal, but with equal devastation. And yet, somewhere deep inside, he felt a flicker of awareness, a whisper that perhaps the story wasn't entirely written, that behind the walls of habit and silence, truths awaited revelation, and that even the most ordinary day could hold the seeds of transformation. And so the routine continued, polished, precise, and painfully hollow. But underneath it, Daniel's heart thudded with questions, doubts, and a fragile hope that the narrative of his marriage might yet twist in ways he could not predict. The city's evening lights flickered on like a constellation of distant fires, casting warm reflections across the glass walls of Daniel's apartment. He had decided, almost on impulse, to attend a small gathering at a friend's apartment 2 blocks away, a way to distract himself from the gnawing thoughts that had consumed him all day. Olivia, busy with an evening PR presentation, had declined, leaving him to navigate the social scene alone.
As he approached the sleek building, he noticed the hum of conversation drifting through the open windows, the faint scent of wine and perfume mingling with the urban air. Daniel hesitated in the hallway for a moment, listening, a strange unease coiling in his chest. His instincts, an unspoken nervous curiosity, propelled him forward. Inside, the apartment was lively but contained, soft jazz in the background, the low murmur of laughter and the clinking of glasses. Daniel moved through it with practiced ease, nodding at acquaintances, shaking hands, offering polite smiles. Yet his mind was elsewhere, orbiting the thought of Olivia. He replayed small fragments of their life together. Her smile in the kitchen that morning, the way she furrowed her brows when reading emails, the subtle distance that had accumulated like dust on the surfaces of their shared existence. Then he heard it, a soft laugh, unmistakable, carrying through the partially open window of a room adjacent to the balcony. His heart skipped. He recognized the tone immediately. Olivia's, familiar, intimate, candid. A whisper of a name, a fragmented sentence, words meant for ears she trusted. Daniel froze mid-step, the polished veneer of the social gathering slipping away. Without conscious thought, he edged closer, drawn by a force he could not name, peering toward the source of the sound. Olivia was there, sitting among friends, her posture relaxed in a way she had not seen in years. Her voice was low, confiding, almost tender. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm trapped in a life I chose, but I never meant to hurt him. I don't know how to balance everything. My career, my ambitions, and us." Daniel's stomach nodded. He felt a mixture of disbelief, relief, and an aching tenderness that he had not anticipated. "She doesn't hate me," Daniel whispered to himself, the words catching in his throat. A small, fragile part of him, a part he had thought buried under the weight of anger, flickered to life. The thought was both comforting and devastating. The years of distance, the nights spent staring at ceilings in silent despair, now seemed complicated by the revelation that Olivia's heart had not abandoned him, only struggled under pressures he had never fully understood.
"She always puts on this perfect facade," one of Olivia's friends said, her tone teasing but gentle. "I mean, everyone sees Olivia Hale, the powerhouse PR executive, confident, untouchable, but I know the nights she comes home and just exhales, letting herself feel human." Daniel felt a jolt. He had never considered the possibility that she too carried invisible burdens. He had assumed composure meant contentment, that her laughter at social events was evidence of happiness. Now he realized that those polished exteriors masked complex internal battles, fears and desires she could only confide to those she trusted. Olivia laughed softly, a sound tinged with vulnerability. "I love him," she admitted quietly. "I do. But sometimes I think he doesn't see me. Not really. And I don't want to seem weak or needy or like I can't handle it. But there are moments I feel like I'm drowning, and I just want someone to notice without me having to say it." Daniel's chest tightened. The confession pierced him more deeply than anger or resentment ever could. For years, he had believed distance and silence were her rejections, her signs that love had ebbed away. Instead, he heard longing, an admission of human fragility, a yearning to be understood. It was intimate, unfiltered, and painfully real. "She misses connection," he muttered to himself, almost reverently. "She's not cold, she's just unseen." The realization swept through him with a force that left him both exhilarated and trembling. The divorce papers he had mentally drafted, the finality he had rehearsed countless times, now seemed premature, almost cruel. He stayed for a few more moments, listening, committing each nuance of her voice, each subtle inflection to memory. Olivia spoke of moments of doubt, of ambition clashing with desire, of the fear of disappointing him. She confided in laughter,
in sighs, in pauses pregnant with emotion. And Daniel, hidden in the shadows, understood that the story he had told himself for months, the story of a loveless, irreparable marriage, was incomplete. As the conversation tapered, Olivia leaned back, eyes distant, contemplative. "I just hope he knows. I haven't stopped loving him. I've just been lost along the way." The words struck Daniel like a quiet revelation, a lightning bolt wrapped in velvet. He felt tears prick the corners of his eyes, though he blinked rapidly to erase them. This wasn't a cinematic moment, not a dramatic confession at a dining table. It was a simple truth, fragile yet undeniable, delivered in a voice only a handful of people had ever heard. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a crack in his certainty. Divorce had seemed inevitable, a logical conclusion to years of distance. But now the human complexity of love and fear, ambition and vulnerability pressed upon him. He realized he had never truly heard her, not in the way that mattered, not in the quiet, unguarded moments when masks fell and only the raw, messy truth remained. When Olivia finally left the room, laughing softly at a shared joke with her friends, Daniel retreated quietly. He navigated the social gathering with a polite smile, but his mind was elsewhere, racing with understanding, remorse, and the subtle, terrifying thrill of possibility. He had overheard something he was never meant to hear, yet it had changed everything. Back in his apartment that night, Daniel stared at the city lights through the window. The skyline seemed different now, softer somehow, illuminated not just by buildings, but by the faint glow of human truth. He thought of Olivia, not as the distant, enigmatic figure he had grown weary of, but as a person, complex, vulnerable, alive, and still capable of love. For the first time, Daniel did not know what he would do next. And for the first time, uncertainty felt like a gift rather than a threat.
Daniel Whitman awoke the next morning to the familiar hum of Manhattan, the distant wail of sirens mingling with the soft drone of early morning traffic. The city, relentless and unyielding, had always been a mirror to his own ambition, fast, calculated, unforgiving. Yet today, as he lay beneath the crisp white sheets, the usual clarity of routine was replaced by chaos. His mind was a tempest of thought, memory, and emotion. He remembered Olivia's words from the night before, the quiet confessions, the laughter tinged with vulnerability, the unguarded admissions that had pierced the armor he thought he had built around his heart. He had come to the gathering expecting distraction, perhaps even confirmation of the futility of their marriage. Instead, he had stumbled upon a truth he wasn't prepared to face. Daniel rose slowly, running a hand over his face, feeling the roughness of a 3-day-old stubble. He stared at the city outside, as if it might provide answers in its jagged skyline or the flickering neon signs below. But the answers were not there. They were tangled in the rooms of his apartment, in the spaces between memory and reality, in the unspoken words that had always defined their marriage. He moved to the kitchen, making coffee in silence. The routine of measuring grounds, pouring hot water, and waiting for the aroma to fill the room was normally soothing, but now it felt almost ritualistic, a distraction from the real work, the mental, emotional excavation of what he had just discovered. Olivia's voice echoed in his mind. "I haven't stopped loving him. I've just been lost along the way." Lost. The word reverberated in his chest. For years, he had felt abandoned, emotionally stranded on an island of his own making and hers, believing that her distance was deliberate, a rejection he could neither mend nor negotiate. And yet, in those whispered words to her friends, he heard a different story. Not rejection, but struggle. Not contempt, but fear. Not absence, but longing. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he sipped his coffee.
He remembered their last fight, small and insignificant to anyone outside their world, yet monumental in its consequences. Olivia had snapped at something trivial, a missed call, a forgotten dinner, an overlooked promise, and he had responded with sharp words, pride fueling his retaliation. He had stormed out, convinced that their love was exhausted, that divorce was inevitable. Now he questioned everything. Had he misread the signs? Had he allowed his own assumptions, his own wounded pride to dictate a path he didn't fully understand? He walked to the living room and sat on the sofa, running his hands over the leather, feeling the familiar creases that mapped years of life together. The apartment, polished and immaculate, felt suffocating. Each object, a vase, a photograph, a set of wine glasses, seemed to whisper reminders of intimacy lost, moments overlooked, and the slow accumulation of distance. Daniel realized that love was not a static entity, but a living, breathing force, vulnerable to neglect, to misinterpretation, to the slow erosion of routine. His mind wandered to memories of Olivia. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, the way she hummed softly while preparing breakfast, the small, fleeting touches that had once felt like promises. These recollections, once comforting, now felt bittersweet, tinged with the weight of things unsaid. He realized that he had spent so long cataloging her distance that he had forgotten to see the nuances of her presence, the micro moments that revealed desire, fear, love, and regret all at once.
By mid-morning, Daniel's thoughts had spiraled into what he feared: hope. The word felt foreign, almost forbidden. Hope implied possibility, risk, vulnerability. It meant confronting feelings he had spent months burying under the guise of rationality and legal inevitability. It meant facing Olivia not as the distant, enigmatic figure he had come to despise in private frustration, but as a woman with fears, desires, and truths she could only share in whispered confidences. He paced the apartment, hands in pockets, voice murmuring softly to himself. She didn't hate me. She loves me. She's just human. She's struggling. And I could have been blind all this time. Each realization was a double-edged sword, a mix of relief and renewed pain. He was forced to confront his own role in the widening gap between them. Pride, stubbornness, and a relentless focus on career success had shaped him into the man she had feared would overshadow her, without him even realizing it. Daniel sat back down, closing his eyes, letting the memories wash over him. He remembered their first apartment together, a modest one-bedroom in Brooklyn filled with secondhand furniture, late-night conversations, and laughter that seemed endless. He remembered the night she cried softly in his arms, overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty, and how he had comforted her, swearing that together they could face anything. That promise had not been broken by malice, but by life, by ambition, by exhaustion, by the subtle betrayals of routine and expectation. He reached for his phone, tempted to call her, to hear her voice, but he hesitated. Words could be both balm and weapon, and he wasn't sure he was ready to navigate the terrain of honesty and emotion. Instead, he sat in silence, grappling with the paradox that had suddenly crystallized. The woman he had been ready to divorce was not an adversary, but a reflection of the human complexity he had failed to see. Hours passed. The sunlight shifted across the apartment, casting long shadows on polished floors and framed photographs. Daniel wrestled with conflicting desires, the urge to protect himself from further pain versus the yearning to reach out, to bridge the distance, to reclaim the intimacy that had been buried beneath years of assumptions and unspoken words. His heart ached with the weight of realization, but it also throbbed with the possibility of redemption, fragile and trembling, yet undeniably present. That night, Daniel sat by the window, city lights spilling across his features, thoughts a tangled web of fear, hope, guilt, and longing. He understood that the decision he had thought was final,
divorce, separation, and orderly severance of ties was no longer absolute. He faced a new dilemma, one that demanded vulnerability and courage. Confront Olivia with what he had overheard, or allow the silent truths between them to remain unspoken, possibly lost forever. He realized that inner conflict was not merely about choice, but about perception, empathy, and courage. The easy path, divorce, legal finality, and emotional detachment was available, yet hollow. The path towards understanding, reconciliation, or even honest confrontation promised no certainty, only risk and the possibility of pain, but also the chance to rediscover what had been nearly forgotten: love, real and imperfect, hidden beneath the veneers of life and society. As the city's night deepened, Daniel's internal battle raged on, quiet but ferocious. He could almost hear Olivia's laughter from the previous night, her confessions echoing in the chambers of his mind. And he knew, with the clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that the choice he would make in the days to come would not only determine the fate of their marriage, but also challenge the very understanding of himself and what it meant to love, forgive, and be vulnerable. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to sit with uncertainty, not as a threat, but as a guide. The inner conflict, raw and relentless, had revealed a possibility he had long denied: that perhaps the story of their marriage was not yet written in stone, and that hope, fragile and flickering, could be reclaimed through courage, honesty, and empathy.
Daniel Whitman woke before dawn, the city still cloaked in the muted gray of early morning. In the quiet of his apartment, the hum of distant traffic barely noticeable, he found himself compelled to wander. His steps carried him to the living room, where the soft light of street lamps spilled across polished floors, illuminating the carefully arranged photographs that chronicled years of their life together. Each frame was a story, a frozen moment, a reminder of both joy and the quiet erosion of intimacy. He paused before one particular photograph, taken 5 years ago at a friend's wedding. Olivia wore a deep green dress that complemented her auburn hair. Her laughter seemed captured mid-breath, the kind of unguarded joy that left Daniel breathless even years later. He remembered that night vividly, the way she had rested her hand on his arm while they watched the bride and groom dance, the subtle tilt of her head as she whispered something only he could hear. That memory had been comforting, a token of love in a life otherwise dominated by deadlines, obligations, and the silent weight of routine. But now, as he stared at the image, the comfort was tinged with something heavier: regret. Daniel realized how much of their life had become a sequence of appearances rather than experiences, a carefully choreographed performance for the world rather than a genuine sharing of hearts. He had been so consumed with success, his law firm, his clients, his public image, that he had neglected the fragile threads of connection that had once defined their marriage. And Olivia, he thought, had not stopped loving him. She had merely been navigating the same currents of fear, ambition, and miscommunication that had shaped him. The memory of last night's overhearing came unbidden, vivid as if it had happened in the room rather than 2 blocks away. Her voice, soft yet resolute, admitting uncertainty, struggle, and longing, echoed through him. Daniel had always prided himself on perception, on reading the subtlest cues of body language and tone. Yet he had failed to see Olivia's internal battles, assuming her distance was rejection when it had been a plea for understanding, a quiet expression of vulnerability he had overlooked. He moved to the window, gazing out at the city as the first hint of sunrise tinged the skyline. The soft glows seemed to illuminate the layers of his own memory, the mornings they had spent together making coffee in silence, the way she hummed softly while folding laundry, the gentle arguments over inconsequential matters that had ended with laughter or tender touches. These moments, seemingly trivial, had carried immense weight.
And now Daniel saw their absence as a tangible void in their relationship. Daniel recalled the night Olivia had cried in his arms, overwhelmed by stress at work and life. He remembered how he had held her, whispering assurances he barely believed himself, promising that together they could endure anything. That promise, once made with conviction, had been eroded over time by distance, pride, and silent assumptions. He felt a sting of guilt, realizing that much of their current disconnect was a product of his inattention, of the small, accumulative betrayals of neglect that he had justified as necessity. He sat heavily on the sofa, closing his eyes, allowing memories to wash over him like waves against rock. There were evenings when they had talked for hours, their voices overlapping with laughter and soft arguments, and moments when silence itself had been comforting, a shared acknowledgement of trust and understanding. Yet, alongside these recollections came darker memories. The growing tension, the subtle frustrations, the unspoken resentments that had quietly crept into their daily lives. Daniel realized now that love was not static. It required attention, empathy, and the willingness to navigate discomfort rather than avoid it.
The city outside began to hum with life as morning progressed. Daniel thought of his routine, the patterns that had defined his days and separated him from Olivia. He remembered the early mornings at the firm, the late nights reading case files, the weekend commitments that had gradually replaced shared breakfasts, museum visits, or simple walks in Central Park. He had convinced himself that ambition justified the distance, yet the truth lay bare now. He had prioritized control over connection, structure over intimacy, and career over the fragile human heart beside him. Pulling a notebook from the side table, Daniel began to write. Short, fragmented sentences, reflections spilling onto paper. He documented memories of joy, sorrow, conflict, and reconciliation. Each word seemed to reveal a layer of himself he had long ignored. The man who loved deeply but feared vulnerability, who sought perfection while overlooking imperfection, who assumed understanding rather than seeking it. Writing became a form of confession, a way to navigate the maze of regret, hope, and desire that now occupied his thoughts. He paused to read what he had written. She loves me. She's scared. We've both been lost. I've been blind. Perhaps there's still time. The sentences, simple yet profound, crystallized his inner turmoil. Divorce had seemed inevitable, a logical resolution to years of distance and silence. Yet, in the quiet revelations of last night and the mosaic of memory, Daniel recognized that their story was not fully written. There existed an uncharted territory of communication, empathy, and understanding, paths to reconciliation he had not yet dared to explore. As the morning sun filtered fully into the apartment, illuminating the photographs and memories scattered throughout, Daniel felt a subtle shift within him. Reflection had transformed regret into awareness, and awareness had opened the door to possibility. He understood that love, real and resilient, required vulnerability. It required acknowledging mistakes, listening without judgment, and embracing the complexity of human emotion. By mid-morning, he felt a tentative resolve take root. He would confront Olivia, not with anger, not with ultimatums, but with honesty. He would share his understanding, his reflections, and perhaps, in doing so, begin the process of rebuilding what had been fractured. The task would be daunting, fraught with uncertainty, yet necessary. For Daniel realized that the stories we tell ourselves, of failure, distance, and inevitability, often obscure the truths that remain, waiting to be discovered through empathy and courage. He set the notebook down, gazing once more at the skyline. The city, indifferent and relentless, continued to hum with life. But for Daniel, the world had subtly shifted. He saw his marriage not as a collection of irreparable routines, but as a living narrative, capable of evolution, revelation, and perhaps redemption. The memories, reflections, and insights of this quiet morning had illuminated both his failings and the possibilities ahead. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt something more than conflict. He felt purpose, not merely the purpose of action, but the purpose of understanding, connection, and the quiet work of love. And with that realization came a fragile, tremulous hope
that the journey back to Olivia might begin, not with grand gestures, but with the honesty, courage, and patience that had long been missing.
The evening was quiet, unusually so, as Daniel Whitman returned to their apartment. The city beyond the windows pulsed with life, the distant honking of taxis, the low hum of traffic, the occasional laughter drifting from a nearby rooftop bar. But inside, the air felt tense, expectant. He carried with him a fragile resolve, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a trembling hope. Tonight, he would confront Olivia, not with accusations or anger, but with truth and vulnerability. Olivia was already home, seated at the dining table with a glass of wine, reviewing notes for her upcoming PR presentation. The soft lamplight cast a warm glow across her features, highlighting the subtle exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her jaw. She looked up as Daniel entered, her expression polite, neutral, but he sensed a quiet curiosity beneath it. She had noticed the shift in his demeanor over the past few days, his silence, his lingering gazes, the unusual stillness that replaced his habitual routine. "Daniel," she said softly, setting her notes aside, "you've been distant." Her tone was careful, probing. There was a trace of vulnerability in her voice, a subtle admission that the walls they had built around themselves were beginning to crack. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of unspoken words press against his chest. "I need to talk to you, Olivia, about us." The words, simple as they were, seemed monumental, as if the act of saying them out loud shifted the very atmosphere in the room. Olivia nodded, a faint tightening of her lips betraying a mixture of apprehension and readiness. She had anticipated this moment in fragments, snippets of silence, subtle expressions, fleeting glances, but now it had arrived in full, undeniable presence. I overheard you," Daniel began, his voice low but steady, careful to avoid accusation. "At the gathering the other night. I wasn't supposed to hear what you said to your friends, but I did, and it changed everything for me." Olivia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise and fear passing over her features. "You heard?" she whispered. Her hand trembled slightly as it rested on the wine glass, betraying the calm she had worked so hard to maintain. "Yes," Daniel replied, his gaze unwavering. "I heard you talking about how you feel. About me. About us. About your fears, your struggles, and your longing." He paused, letting the words settle. "And I realized that I've been blind. I thought I understood everything, but I was wrong. I misread your distance as rejection, your silence as apathy. I see now that it was something else entirely." A silence fell between them, thick and heavy, yet not uncomfortable. It was the weight of truth settling into the spaces where misunderstanding had lingered for years. Olivia's eyes softened, and for the first time in months, Daniel saw the flicker of the woman he had once adored. Not the professional, composed exterior the world saw, but the vulnerable human being who had shared his life, his laughter, and his fears. I didn't know how to show you," Olivia said quietly, her voice trembling just enough to reveal her inner turmoil. "I didn't want to seem weak or needy or incapable of handling everything. I thought if I just kept going, kept smiling, you'd understand. But I see now, I failed. I failed to let you in."
Daniel felt a pang of sorrow, mixed with relief. Her confession, so raw and honest, mirrored the realizations he had confronted in the past days. "Olivia, it's not just you," he admitted. "I've been distant too. I've let pride, work, routine, everything come between us. I assumed understanding was automatic, that love could survive neglect, and now I see how wrong I was." She lowered her gaze, tracing the rim of her wine glass with a finger, and Daniel could almost see the weight of unspoken regret etched into every line of her posture. I thought you had stopped caring," she whispered. "I thought maybe we were over before we even had a chance to fight for it." Daniel shook his head, stepping closer, careful not to overwhelm her. "I care,"
he said simply, but the simplicity of the statement carried years of suppressed emotion. I've always cared. I just didn't understand how to reach you. And now, hearing you, seeing your truth, I realize that I've been given a second chance. But it's fragile, Olivia. We can't pretend anymore. We have to be honest with ourselves and each other. Her eyes lifted to meet his, glimmering with unshed tears, a mix of fear and hope. Honest? She asked, almost as if testing the reality of the moment. Yes, he replied. Honest. No walls, no assumptions, no silence. We talk, we listen, we try again, or we fail trying, but we do it together, or not at all. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two individuals who had navigated years of love, resentment, misunderstanding, and longing. The room seemed suspended in time. The hum of the city outside fading into insignificance compared to the intensity of their shared gaze. Finally, Olivia reached out, her hand brushing against his. The touch was light, tentative, yet it carried a weight neither of them could deny. Daniel grasped her hand, a silent affirmation of commitment, an acknowledgement of their shared desire to confront the past and rebuild what had been fractured. I don't know if we can fix everything, Olivia admitted. I don't know if the habits, the routines, the distance, if all that can be undone. But I do know that I want to try, and I want us to be honest, completely honest from now on. Daniel nodded, feeling a surge of relief and cautious optimism. Then we start now. No pretending, no avoidance. We face it all. The fear, the mistakes, the love, the desire, everything. They stood there, hand in hand, in the warm lamplight of their apartment. Two people confronting years of misunderstanding with a courage that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. It was not a resolution, not yet, but a turning point. The first step in a journey that demanded honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to rebuild from the fragments of their shared past. As they embraced, briefly, almost reverentially, Daniel realized that confrontation was not a moment of conflict, but a moment of clarity. It was the point at which truth, finally spoken, illuminated the path forward. The road ahead would be uncertain, fraught with challenges and emotional turbulence, but for the first time in months, he felt aligned with hope rather than despair. And in that quiet, transformative moment, Daniel understood something fundamental. Love, when truly tested, required courage, honesty, and the willingness to see the person beside you not as an adversary, not as a mirror of disappointment, but as a human being, flawed, vulnerable, and infinitely worthy of connection.
The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of their apartment, casting warm, golden slivers of light across the bedroom. Daniel Whitman sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped tightly, staring at the carpet as though the fibers might provide answers he could not find elsewhere. Last night's confrontation with Olivia had cracked open walls long cemented by habit, distance, and silent assumptions. But clarity did not equal certainty. Today, he faced the most consequential question of their marriage. What comes next? Olivia entered the room quietly, a cup of coffee in her hands, and sat beside him on the bed. The air between them was filled with a fragile tension, a mixture of hope, fear, and the weight of unspoken expectations. Neither spoke immediately. Words seemed inadequate to navigate the complexity of the emotions coursing through them. Finally, Daniel exhaled, the sound loud in the still morning. Olivia, I've been thinking, he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. About us, about everything. Last night, I realized that the narrative I had built in my mind about you, about our marriage, it was incomplete. I only saw fragments, and fragments, they don't tell the full story. Olivia nodded, placing her hand over his. I know, she said softly. I've been thinking too, about my own fears, my own mistakes, about the times I let ambition, pride, or exhaustion dictate my actions. I never meant to hurt you, Daniel. I only got lost along the way. The words hung between them, delicate yet laden with meaning. Daniel felt a swell of emotion, regret,
relief, longing, all merging into a profound recognition of their shared humanity. It was as if for the first time in years, they were seeing each other clearly, without the distortions of resentment, assumption, or fear. "I don't want to lose us," Daniel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been ready to walk away because I thought love had ended. But now, hearing you, seeing you, remembering us, it's clear that what we have is still real. But reality isn't enough. We need choice. We need intention." Olivia's eyes glistened, her lower lip pressed between her teeth in a small, anxious gesture she remembered from years ago, an expression of vulnerability she only showed when she felt deeply. "Choice," she echoed. "Yes, I want choice too. I don't want us to drift apart because of fear or pride or habit, but it won't be easy. We've hurt each other. We've neglected each other. And the truth is, the old patterns are hard to break." Daniel leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly. He considered the life they had built together, the apartment, their social circles, the carefully curated image of a successful couple in Manhattan. These things, once sources of pride, now felt hollow when compared to the fragile, living truth of their bond. He understood that love required more than shared addresses or routines. It required courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. "I'm willing to try," he said finally, his tone firm yet tender. "Not because I fear losing you, but because I want to find us again, fully, honestly, intentionally. If we do this, it will mean change. It will mean listening when it's uncomfortable, admitting when we're wrong, and making each other a priority even when life demands otherwise."
Olivia nodded, her hand squeezing his gently. "I want that too. But we have to decide together, Daniel. No half measures. No pretending. We have to face the fear, the mistakes, the parts of ourselves we've avoided. Only then can we rebuild something that lasts." The room seemed to hold its breath as they sat together, contemplating the gravity of the choice before them. Divorce had once appeared inevitable, a tidy solution to distance, miscommunication, and years of unspoken grievances. Now that path seemed empty, almost cowardly when weighed against the possibility of repair, intimacy, and rediscovered trust. Daniel reached for Olivia's hand, intertwining their fingers. The gesture was simple, yet profoundly symbolic, a commitment to vulnerability, a promise to navigate uncertainty together. "Are you ready to really try?" Her gaze met his, unwavering. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm ready. Not because it will be easy, but because it's worth it. Because we're worth it." For the first time in months, Daniel felt a profound sense of alignment. The conflict that had plagued him, the silent fears, the assumptions, the lingering resentment, shifted into a new form of energy. Determination. It was not a naive certainty, nor a promise of effortless happiness. It was a conscious, deliberate decision to engage, to face difficulty with empathy, and to embrace the risk of vulnerability for the sake of love. They spent the morning talking, unpacking years of miscommunication, reflecting on moments of neglect, and sharing fears long suppressed. Daniel listened as Olivia recounted her experiences of feeling unseen and misunderstood. He spoke of his own insecurities, his frustrations with silence, and the pressure of expectations, both internal and external. With each confession, each acknowledgement, the walls between them crumbled, replaced with fragile bridges built from honesty and intention. By day mid, the apartment felt different, lighter, open, infused with a sense of possibility. They had not erased the past, nor healed every wound, but they had created a space in which repair was possible. The decision to try, together, was not a culmination, but a beginning, a conscious embrace of uncertainty, commitment, and mutual accountability. Daniel realized that the act of choosing, of facing the fear of vulnerability and embracing love intentionally, was itself transformative. It was a recognition that the quality of a relationship is measured not by absence of conflict, but by the courage to confront it.
Divorce had seemed like the only path, but now he understood that love, when nurtured and chosen, could transcend even the deepest fissures. As they sat together, hands entwined, city sounds drifting through open windows, Daniel felt a quiet, resolute hope. The decision point had arrived, not imposed by circumstance, but forged by awareness, reflection, and the willingness to face truth. In choosing to fight for their marriage, they had also chosen each other, fully and consciously, accepting that the journey ahead would demand patience, courage, and relentless honesty. And in that moment, Daniel understood a profound truth. Love is not merely a feeling, it is a decision, a deliberate commitment to see, hear, and honor the person beside you, despite fear, imperfection, and the inevitability of human fragility. For the first time in years, Daniel felt whole, not because certainty had returned, but because the choice had been made. The path forward would be neither simple nor predictable, but it would be theirs, together, intentional, and alive with possibility.
The morning light in Manhattan filtered gently through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the apartment in a soft, forgiving glow. Daniel Whitman stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the city come alive with its usual rhythm, the distant wails of sirens, the clatter of subway trains, and the occasional laughter drifting up from the streets. The city, relentless and unyielding, had a way of reminding him that life moved forward, whether one was ready or not. Today, however, he felt aligned with that movement, at peace in a way he had not in months. Olivia entered the room, her presence light and unassuming, carrying a small bouquet of flowers she had picked up from a nearby market. She smiled, a smile that carried warmth, relief, and a quiet strength. It was a smile that had survived the fractures, the distance, and the misunderstandings. Daniel felt a familiar pull in his chest, a mixture of longing and gratitude. "Good morning," she said softly, placing the flowers on the kitchen counter. The scent of lilies and roses filled the room, subtle yet invigorating. "I thought we could start today differently." Daniel set his coffee down and turned to her, taking her hands in his. "I'd like that," he said, his voice calm, steady, and filled with intention. "Today is a new beginning." They spoke quietly, not with urgency or pressure, but with the deliberate rhythm of two people rediscovering each other. Conversations ranged from trivial matters, plans for the weekend, upcoming work deadlines, to reflections on the past months, the moments of distance, and the revelations that had brought them to this point. Each sentence, each acknowledgement, was a brick in the fragile but resilient foundation they were rebuilding together. Daniel recalled the conversation at last night's dinner, the moment when truths had been laid bare. The memory no longer carried the sting of fear or betrayal, but had transformed into a reference point, a lesson on the importance of honesty, vulnerability, and attentive love. Olivia had shared her fears, her regrets, and the hidden desires that had remained unspoken. Daniel, in turn, had confessed his own failings, his misunderstandings, and the ways he had inadvertently allowed pride and routine to erode their intimacy. By midday, they had decided to implement small changes, deliberate acts to nurture connection. A shared breakfast on weekends, dedicated time each evening to talk, not about work, bills, or errands, but about life, dreams, and each other. They agreed on honest communication, on confronting discomfort rather than avoiding it, and on seeking to understand before assuming. These were simple, almost mundane actions, yet Daniel understood that they were the threads of trust, intimacy, and resilience that could weave a marriage anew. As the afternoon sun reached its zenith, Daniel and Olivia took a walk through Central Park, the familiar paths and tree-lined avenues carrying both nostalgia and the promise of renewal. They spoke of future plans, cautiously optimistic but grounded in reality. Daniel felt the weight of past months ease with every step, replaced by a deliberate awareness of presence.
The laughter they shared was soft, genuine, and unforced, an acknowledgement that joy could coexist with regret, and that love could thrive alongside vulnerability.
Daniel reflected on the journey that had led to this resolution. Divorce had once seemed inevitable, a tidy solution to years of distance, silence, and misunderstanding. Yet the reality they had uncovered, through overheard confessions, deep reflection, and honest confrontation, revealed that love was more complex, resilient, and fragile than he had allowed himself to recognize. It was a living entity, shaped by choice, care, and courage. Olivia's hand found his again as they paused by the Bow Bridge, the city skyline glittering beyond the park's green expanse. "Do you think we're really okay?" she asked, a hint of vulnerability threading her words. Daniel looked at her, truly looked, and saw not just his wife, but a partner, a confidant, a fellow traveler navigating the complexities of human emotion. He admitted, "We're not perfect, but we're trying, and that counts. That's what makes it real. That's what gives us a chance." She smiled, the kind of smile that held relief, hope, and recognition of the effort required. "Then let's keep trying, every day. No pretending, no walls." They returned to the apartment as evening approached, the golden light of sunset spilling into their home. Daniel prepared a simple dinner, Olivia helping where she could, laughter and quiet conversation weaving through the air like threads of reconnection. The rituals of daily life, once taken for granted or performed in silence, had become acts of intimacy, deliberate and meaningful. After dinner, they sat together on the sofa, the city lights twinkling beyond the park, reflecting in their eyes. Daniel felt a deep, abiding sense of peace, not because the past had vanished, but because they had faced it, acknowledged it, and chosen to move forward intentionally. He understood that love was not merely the absence of conflict, but the willingness to navigate it with empathy, courage, and honesty. Olivia's hand found his again as they paused by the Bow Bridge, the city skyline glittering beyond the park's green expanse. Olivia rested her head on his shoulder, a gesture of trust and reassurance. Daniel felt the familiar warmth, the shared heartbeat of two people committed to understanding each other anew. They spoke little, content in the silence that carried more meaning than any words could convey. As the night deepened, Daniel reflected on the transformation that had occurred within him. The overheard words that had once sparked doubt and confusion had become a catalyst for introspection, confrontation, and ultimately resolution. He had faced fear, pride, and past assumptions, emerging with a renewed commitment to the relationship, to the person beside him, and to the choices that would define their shared future. Before retiring for the night, Daniel and Olivia sat by the window, looking out at the city that never slept. He reached for her hand once more, intertwining fingers. "Whatever comes next," he said softly, "we face it together, intentionally, honestly, fully." Olivia smiled, her eyes reflecting both the city lights and a deep-seated sense of hope. "Together," she agreed. In that quiet, ordinary moment, the extraordinary had occurred. They had reclaimed their connection, not through grand gestures or sudden epiphanies, but through the deliberate choice to see, hear, and understand each other. Love, fragile yet resilient, had been renewed. The past remained a part of them, but it no longer dictated their future. Daniel realized that the resolution was not an ending, but a beginning, a commitment to navigate life's uncertainties, challenges, and joys with empathy, honesty, and courage. The city outside continued its ceaseless rhythm, indifferent yet inspiring, a reminder that life moved forward and that within its currents they had found their own path, chosen together. As they finally turned in for the night, hand in hand, Daniel felt a profound sense of gratitude, for understanding, for vulnerability, for the chance to rebuild, and most importantly, for the quiet, steady truth that love, when nurtured and chosen intentionally, could endure, evolve, and flourish, even in the face of fear, mistakes, and uncertainty.